Annyeonghaseyo. Good morning and welcome to the 2020 New South Wales Business Forum. My name is Alex Neville, Consular Advisor at the Consulate General of Korea, and today I will be your MC. Thank you all for your attendance, and thank you particularly to the New South Wales Government for co-hosting today's forum with us. Please welcome Consul General Sang Woo-hong to deliver his welcoming remarks. Thank you, Consul General.
Hello, good morning. It's my great pleasure to co-host the 2020 Korea New South Wales Business Forum today in cooperation with the New South Wales government. Firstly, I'd like to thank our speakers for their presence, especially our keynote speaker, Commissioner Jeff Roberts, AM, the Chief Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission, and the Head of the Global Relationship of New South Wales Treasury. Thank you all for presenting for us, and I very much look forward to hearing your ideas on economic cooperation between Korea and New South Wales. I would also like to thank all of the attendees who have joined this forum, especially those from Korea, and I hope that you are all able to gain a deeper insight into New South Wales and Korea's current and future economic partnership. The Korea-New South Wales Business Forum is an important platform to make assessments on the status of our economic relations and explore the way forward. I regret that we are unable to hold this event in person this year, as it has been since 2011. In holding this forum, we hope not only to keep our participants safe, but also to show how much can be done even during these difficult times. In response to COVID-19 and in preparation for the era beyond COVID-19, the Korean government has recently announced a future-oriented national economic strategy called Korean New Deal, which will set the foundations for Korea's next 100 years. It is comprised of the Green New Deal and the Digital New Deal, with both offering a multitude of mutually beneficial opportunities to New South Wales and Korea. As such, today's forum is a special chance to explore the potential for engagement, especially between Korea's New Deal and the global New South Wales market strategy. Korea and New South Wales, whilst already close economic partners, still have many areas where we can expand our cooperation in trade and investment. Korea, as Australia's fourth largest trading partner, plays an important role in the Australian economy, such as Samsung C&T's Sydney West Connect Tunnel, Hyundai Rotem's train for Sydney Intercity Line, and the Hyundai Motors' commitment to use green hydrogen produced in Australia. This pandemic has had a drastic impact on the lives of people around the world, and in turn has had a greater knocks on the effects of the global economy. But the cooperation our countries have shown in working together to combat this pandemic also carries over to our outlook in ensuring our mutual economic recovery. Indeed, next year, Lotte Duty Free and Nonghyuk Bank are both opening locations here in Sydney, with growing industries such as hydrogen and green energy. Korea and New South Wales are uniquely placed in global market to capitalize on resource and the technology advantages that our two countries have. With these inherent advantages, there is a real possibility for Korea and New South Wales to expand into new and untapped areas such as medtech and agtech. This business forum is forced to build on that momentum and to present possibilities for greater promotion and diversifications of trade and investment for both our economies. For those common goals, I'd also like to emphasize that it is very important to duly address the pending issues and the difficulties of Korean companies especially those who have long invested in Australia. Last but not least, with the next year marking the 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties between Korea and Australia, now is the perfect time to continue to elevate that relationship for the next 60 years to come. Thank you all once again for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed today's forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Consul General. I would now like to ask our keynote speaker, Jeff Roberts, AM, Chief Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission and Head of Global Relationships for New South Wales Treasury, to deliver his keynote speech. Welcome, Commissioner Roberts.
Well, thank you very much for welcoming me here today, and especially to you, Mr. Hong, Consul General. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with you today, and I welcome all the Korean business people that are listening. Before I start, can I just pass on the deep respect and best wishes from the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian, and also the best wishes from Minister Stuart Ayres, the Minister for Jobs, Investment, Tourism, and especially Western Sydney. Both those people I have seen this morning, and they both asked me to pass their best wishes and deep respect to you, Mr. Consul General, and to all the Korean business people online today. The other thing I would like to say before I get into the details of my speech is just how much the New South Wales government and more generally the Australian government admire Korea as a country and as a people. Your response to COVID has been world leading. We would regard ourselves also as being a leader in the world, but frankly, I think you were the first country in the world that really got organised around the threat of COVID-19, and we learned a lot from you through this very difficult year. So thank you for that. But a couple of other points as well that go beyond the COVID-19 response. Your ability to use technology to transform industries, and you are some of the biggest investors in R&D in the world, is just outstanding. And Sydney and New South Wales and Australia, I think, invent tomorrow's world as perhaps as well as Korea does, but you certainly embed that in industry better than we do at the moment, and we would like to continue to learn from you in that regard. And your leadership globally on digital enablement has really been absolutely exemplary. And Mr. Consul General, I also loved your announcement then about your new deal and your digital component and your green component. We also we use the word deal in New South Wales quite a lot. We have the Western Sydney City deal, which I'll explain a little bit more about later on. But I love how you use the fact that your new deal is a 100-year strategy. We think we are clever having a strategy for New South Wales and for Sydney to 2056 at the moment. I can't imagine what it would be like to try and think about technology change, human change, and a civil society over 100 years. So thank you very much for being an exemplar for the world and for us in those areas. More particularly, I am very pleased to see the strong and ever-growing relationship of New South Wales with the Republic of Korea, particularly in these uncertain times. We've had challenges this year. Our tourism and our education sectors have really been collateral damage in the short term with the COVID-19 arrangements, and they have been quite constrained. But I'm sure both those sectors will return with gusto. And in addition to that, there are many new and emerging opportunities between our two countries. You grew in the third, the biggest quarterly increase the country has seen, I think, for 10 years. I think it was in the order of 1.9%. That is really a stellar economic performance. You're our third largest export market for New South Wales, and we treat our trade relationships very seriously. Traditionally, you have been an investor in natural resources and infrastructure projects, and these are critical to us, but I think there is a future between the New South Wales government and economy and Korean investment that is much broader than the traditional and infrastructure companies. There are some early examples of that. Your Spark Labs Cultivate Agri-Tech and food tech startup in Orange. Orange is actually my hometown where I was born, is very important. And Hyundai has announced recently investment in our car next door startup ecosystems in Sydney. So these are but a few of what we're starting to see in our burgeoning investment relationship. But what I want to really do today, having acknowledged that, is really to paint a picture about where New South Wales is going, and particularly where Sydney is going in the post-COVID-19 world. And I hold two roles in the government. The first is that I'm the Chief Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission. The Greater Sydney Commission is the organisation that reports to the Premier and provides the economic leadership of the city from a planning, infrastructure and investment perspective. The second role I play, reporting to the Treasurer, is really to be the manager of our relationships. Where are we encouraging international investment and trade in and out of New South Wales, not just Sydney, but New South Wales? And what I can say today is that we are very, very focused on a very swift economic recovery in New South Wales and particularly Sydney post-COVID. And we believe that this will be, if you like, a precincts-led recovery. So our aim will be to increase the number of smart jobs, of jobs in Sydney that are based around technology and based around high levels of embedded knowledge. We see Sydney and broader New South Wales as a place that is more desirable for the world to do business in a post-COVID-19 world. And the reason for that is because of our low sovereign risk, our ability to manage debt and our infrastructure program, and the fact that we're open for business. So I just want to spend a little time just really bringing out to you where we think, and I think, the most important places, the most important precincts in New South Wales and in Sydney will be. I think businesses have the most important opportunities to contribute. And in Sydney, there are three of these precincts. Many of you know that in the last few years, the Greater Sydney Commission and the government has really focused on Sydney being a metropolis of three cities: our Eastern Harbour City, Central River City, and our Western Parkland City. Our Eastern Harbour City, from a precinct perspective, will be anchored in a place just west of the existing central business district of Sydney, an area that we refer to as Tech Central. Now, I don't really like to use these analogies, but Tech Central is our Silicon Valley. It's the place where our homegrown global superpower in deep tech industries, the company called Atlassian that many people on the line would know of. Atlassian has, in the last few months, agreed to build its global HQ inside the Tech Central precinct. The other activity, the other sector that we believe is critical in Tech Central is around advanced manufacturing in deep tech, but particularly in creative industries as well as the fintech and cyber secure technology areas. There is no question that we are a more attractive place for pre and post movie production in the world, and we want to locate those advanced technology procedures also in Tech Central. So Tech Central is an opportunity. It is anchored by the Central to Everleigh sub-precinct within Tech Central. Many of you know that we are upgrading our central railway system at the moment, but we would expect within 10 to 20 years, at least 3 universities, our national industrial research organisation called CSIRO, and at least 50,000 jobs and at least 20 global companies to be located along with startups and scale-ups in the Tech Central precinct. Now, some of your big businesses are already expressing interest in the Tech Central. If you are involved in engineering, digital technology, cyber secure outcomes, creative industries, and you wish to look at Sydney as an investment portfolio, then we would strongly recommend that you come and talk to us about Tech Central. And my objective as the Chief Commissioner is that over time, the Eastern Harbour City is not just known by its geographical name, but it's also known as a global business name. If I move beyond our first city to our second precinct, which is our Westmead precinct, Westmead is really the capital of the greater Parramatta area, located about 20 kilometres away from the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. And Westmead is really centred around medtech, health and innovation. So if the first city is centred around Tech Central, is around deep tech, fintech, then the second city, the Westmead and Parramatta precinct, is centred around medtech. Now, Westmead has the biggest hospital complex in the Southern Hemisphere. There are 18 research institutes already located at Westmead. We do somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 medical trials a year at Greater Westmead, and it is the place where the most important medical research and conversion to commercialisation will happen in New South Wales and in Australia, and be one of the most important medical technology precincts in the world. Sydney has a proud history of medtech companies. I guess the most famous of those would be Cochlear. Australia has also a famous history in medtech companies. CSL would be another example. But there are many other businesses that are of global significance, and we are really very, very bullish about attracting international investment in nuclear medicine and in genomics, kids' cancer, viral vector outcomes associated with Westmead. So if you are interested in, and I know there are people online who are in medical technologies, even our PPE response to the COVID-19 pandemic has really ensured a very onshoring approach to medical technologies. So first city is about technology. Second city is about technology, is about medical technologies. I might just say also Sydney is one of only 3 cities in the world that a medical isotope nuclear reactor that is active. So our Lucas Heights facility in the southern part of Sydney is very, very important for medical research and medical isotopes. And the work at Westmead and the ANSTO, we call that ANSTO, is very important in terms of future medical research at Westmead. The third city, and the city that I have spent a lot of my last 5 years focusing on, is the Great Western City. So we are now 60 kilometres west of the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House, where Sydney's second airport and Sydney's first 24-hour airport is currently being built. In fact, the Premier visited Korea and visited your Incheon airport about 2 or 3 years ago to learn from you about how to build an aerotropolis around a modern airport. Now, we have frankly been quite overwhelmed with the international business interest in the Western Sydney aerotropolis. It is the powerhouse, the economic powerhouse of Sydney in the future. We have already committed $25 billion worth of public capital between our Australian government and our New South Wales government and our local governments in Western Sydney. There will be people online, I'm sure, that are interested in the metro line, which will come in the next months. But companies like Samsung have signed up as foundation partners in the Western Sydney aerotropolis. CSIRO has also agreed to put its Sydney HQ in the aerotropolis. So the aerotropolis is the place where we will be doing translation of high technology industry work in the space, defence industry, freight and logistics, and ag tech sectors. So what we are trying to do in each of these 3 precincts is to have multiple universities, to have our CSIRO co-located, to have the best businesses in the world, and to support start-up and scale-up businesses so that each of these locations have somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 jobs within a 10 to 20-year period. So the best of the best is what we want in these 3 areas, and there are many, many Korean companies that we're very, very interested in talking to around those 3 opportunities. If I briefly then take us to regional New South Wales, there are a number of what we call special activation precincts in regional New South Wales. Now, these won't be as big as the 3 precincts in Sydney, but they are very, very important. A few of these briefly. The Williamtown Precinct, just north of Newcastle, is our second biggest urban conurbation in New South Wales. The broader Newcastle area is about 1 million people. The Williamtown Precinct is home to the Asia Pacific F-35 JSF Joint Strike Fighter fleet. There will be a whole ecosystem of sustainment aircraft around Williamtown, and the joint defence initiatives of the Australian government and the Republic of Korea. There, I'm sure, are opportunities there. In a place called Parkes, about 400 kilometres west of Sydney, the intersection of 2 freight rail lines, we have major waste-to-energy opportunities. And Consul General, in your introduction, you spoke about the Green New Deal, and I know Andrew Lewis is going to speak to you more a little later about the New South Wales government's interests in energy, hydrogen, and moving to a clean tech economy and a carbon neutral economy. I would suggest that for businesses that have those sorts of technologies, Parkes is a very important place to look at. And the final one I would like to talk about is the great city of Wagga. Some people call it Wagga Wagga in the Riverina. So we're now south and west of Sydney, maybe 600 kilometres south and west of Sydney, where one of Australia's biggest companies, Visy, who will be known well to many people online, have invested in circular economy, paper product recycling outcomes. So that's my message today is Wales is open business. We are now getting very particular about precinct specialisations, the government supporting those precincts with the appropriate levels of digital and physical infrastructure. We have a trained workforce. We have an aligned strategy. We have a $100 billion infrastructure pipeline over the next 4 years. It's actually grown by $3 billion during COVID. We are a very safe and friendly place to do business, and I would love to work with Korean businesses to deepen those ties over the next few years. I would also like to acknowledge Ms. Julie Quinn, the Trade and Investment Commissioner Designate, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner Designate from Austrade. The New South Wales Government works seamlessly with Austrade. I look forward to that relationship deepening over the coming years as well. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I welcome follow-on conversations. Mr. Consul General, let's out and have a cup of tea or coffee prior to Christmas to take forward this initiative. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that insightful speech. I would now like to ask Mr. Kyung-Suk Lee, Deputy Director of KOTRA, to now present on Korea's current investment environment for the forum. Please welcome Mr. Lee.
Good morning. I'm Kyung-Suk Lee, Deputy Director at KOTRA Sydney. I'm honored to participate in this event. I will update you with the latest information of Korea's investment environment and show the attractiveness of Korea as the investment destination. So these are the topics of today's presentation. First, let's see how is Korea's economy now. Korea is the world's 12th largest economy with 1.63 trillion US dollars in GDP. Korea has strong economic fundamentals as it is ranked 5th in current account balance, 8th in trade volume, and 9th in foreign exchange reserves. According to OECD, Korea's economic growth rate dipped to less than that of the US and Japan in the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis and recovered faster than the two countries. In 2019, Korea's economic growth rate was 2%, lower than that of China and the US, but higher than that of Japan. Korea's exports in 2019 reached $568.9 billion. Korea is the world's 7th largest exporter. The ratio of public debt to GDP has increased over the past decade little by little, but still remains overwhelmingly low compared to other major economies. By IMF standards in 2019, the ratio of public debt to GDP was 40.5% in Korea, while it was 106 in the US and 237 in Japan. Korea is at a comparatively stable level than other countries. Next, I will show the current snapshot of FDI in Korea. Korea's FDI inflows have continued to grow, recording $23.3 billion in 2019, exceeding the 20 billion mark for 5 years in a row. The FDI by the US in 2019 into Korea was $68.42 million US dollars, accounting for 1/4 of all declared FDI inflows. UK and Hong Kong followed with $20 million and $19 million respectively. And by sector, FDI in the manufacturing occupies 35.2% of total amount, showing 3-year annual growth of 2%. The portion of FDI in the service sectors is the biggest, 63.3%, but it is contracting 1.6% annually. According to the survey by KOTRA, the biggest reason for foreign investment in Korea was entry into the Korean domestic market, followed by the Korean market's potential for growth and the establishment of global networks. And why should it be Korea? Korea's strong economic fundamentals stem from its leading industries, which are driving global markets. Korea's DRAM, NAND flash, EV battery, TV, and foldable OLED display are #1 industries in the world. According to OECD, Korea's tertiary education completion rate of people aged 25 to 34 is 70%, the highest in the world. The country has maintained its unchallenged top position among OECD members since 2008. It is much higher than major advanced countries, including US and Germany. It is the illustration of Korea's abundant talent with a high-level education. The World Bank found that Korea's labor costs are lower than those of Japan, Germany, and the US. Korea's monthly minimum wage for full-time workers as of 2019 is $1,284, which is $300 lower than Japan. In comparison with Norway, Korea is 2.5 times lower. Korea maintains FTAs with 56 countries worldwide, and the total amount of the country's GDPs reaches 77% of world's GDP. It makes Korea a trade springboard where you can trade with any market with low tariffs. Next, let's look at Korea's business environment. In the Doing Business report by the World Bank, Korea was ranked 5th out of 190 countries surveyed. Korea has maintained the top 5 position since 2014. Korea's corporate tax is 25%, the same as China, and 1% higher than Malaysia. The corporate tax rates of Japan, India, and Australia are 30%, as you may know, about 5% higher than that of Korea. Korea offers reasonable electricity rates. According to OECD and International Energy Agency, Korea's industrial sector energy consumption rates in 2018 amounted to $110 per megawatt. It is the lowest among the members. So far, I have shown that Korea is an attractive invest destination, supported by a lot of concrete facts. If you are interested and want to know more, I suggest you attend Invest Korea Week 2020. Invest Korea Week is Korea's largest foreign investment attraction event hosted by Invest Korea, an organization under KOTRA. It is held for 3 days every year, offering various programs, including forums, one-on-one consultations, and startup pitching IR sessions. In 2019, 1,115 people and 305 foreign companies participated, exploring opportunities to invest in Korea. It starts 11th November, next Wednesday. You can join the event online just by visiting its homepage, so don't miss it. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much, Director Lee. As always, that was very insightful. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Andrew Lewis, the Executive Director of Energy, Consumers and Programs at New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, who will be presenting on Stage 1 of New South Wales Net Zero Plan. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here with this, speaking at this event today. The New South Wales Government is committed to taking decisive and responsible action to reduce emissions and secure the state's economic prosperity for the decades to come. New South Wales is contributing towards the international goal to reach net zero emissions by 2050 by creating new jobs, reducing household costs, and attracting new investment to New South Wales. Over the past 12 months, the New South Wales Government has announced a number of policies, programs and initiatives in the energy space that will support our net zero ambitions, including our electricity strategy, a net zero plan stage 1, signing a memorandum of understanding with the Commonwealth Government and commissioning the New South Wales Chief Scientist to undertake a decarbonisation study. So as I mentioned, New South Wales has designed and implemented an electricity strategy. Its purpose is to create a competitive, low-cost market that delivers resilient energy supply while putting downward pressure on electricity prices. It seeks to take advantage of falling renewable energy generation capital costs while supporting the rollout of emerging technologies such as energy storage. A key action in the strategy is to deliver 3 renewable energy zones in the state, delivering up to 17,700 megawatts of generation capacity and $23 billion in private sector investment. To put that in some context, the existing installed capacity in New South Wales is around 15,000 to 16,000 megawatts. Renewable energy zones involve the coordinated development of new electricity generation and transmission infrastructure in areas that are rich in renewable energy. The renewable energy zones will combine generation, storage and high voltage transmission lines, and we see them as the modern day equivalent of a traditional power station. By connecting multiple solar farms, wind farms and energy storage in the same location, renewable energy zones capitalise on economies of scale and will deliver the cheap, reliable and clean electricity New South Wales needs to support its economy. Renewable energy zones will see billions of dollars of investment from energy projects flowing into regional New South Wales. The Australian Energy Market Operator has just endorsed our decision to fast-track the process by prioritising the renewable energy zones in its integrated system plan. Second, we have developed a fully funded net zero plan with a $2 billion investment and a roadmap to cut emissions by 35% by 2030 on the way to net zero emissions by 2050. The Net Zero Plan Stage 1 is the most comprehensive plan in the nation to achieve our net zero emission goals. The plan has 4 priority areas for action: driving the uptake of proven emission reduction technologies, empowering customers and businesses to make sustainable choices, investing in the next wave of emissions reduction innovation, and ensuring that the New South Wales Government leads by example. The Net Zero Plan is a foundation for New South Wales' actions on climate change and also requires action by local government, business, communities and individuals. It sets out the government's plan to reduce emissions over the next decade while also growing the economy, creating new jobs and lowering the cost of living. The plan is expected to deliver a 35% reduction in emissions in New South Wales by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. The plan also outlines how we will invest now in the next wave of emission reduction innovation to reduce emissions further and ensure economic prosperity beyond 2030. The plan supports initiatives to support sector-wide transformation towards the low-emission future. These initiatives in particular relate to energy efficiency, electric vehicles, hydrogen, primary industries, coal innovation, organic waste and carbon financing. Overall, the Net Zero Plan is expected to attract $11.6 billion of new investment to New South Wales and support around 2,500 new jobs. A memorandum of understanding between the Commonwealth and New South Wales governments sets out a clear long-term path to help our state meet its target of net zero emissions by 2050. While this MOU provides the framework for how we will reach net zero emissions, the Net Zero Plan and the electricity strategy are the roadmaps for how we will deliver this. As we continue to develop and implement our policies, we will look to other initiatives such as Korea's Green New Deal to understand further opportunities and initiatives. Turning now to hydrogen, Australia's Chief Scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, has identified that Australia can produce up to 50% of the world's hydrogen needs. We recognise and are encouraged by Korea's own recently released Hydrogen Economy Roadmap. The New South Wales Government has actively participated in the development of the National Hydrogen Strategy, and we are currently developing a New South Wales Hydrogen Strategy that will align with it to detail the New South Wales vision and direction for developing a green hydrogen industry to 2030 and beyond. The New South Wales Hydrogen Initiative will help accelerate the emerging hydrogen market and build domestic demand. We will be supporting research, development and commercialisation of hydrogen technologies and have set an aspirational target of 10% hydrogen blending in our gas network by 2030. The recently released New South Wales Decarbonisation Innovation Study by the New South Wales Chief Scientist identified 65 economic opportunities across key sectors of the state's economy, including services, energy, industry, the built environment, land management and transport. Hydrogen is at the heart of many opportunities across these sectors, particularly as an enabler for precinct or hub-based sustainable industry growth and as an energy source for heavy transport, as well as representing a significant green export opportunity. We're already looking at hydrogen buses as potential participants in the zero-emission bus trials being run by Transport for New South Wales. Hydrogen has the potential to support decarbonisation of our economy, firm the electricity system, increase jobs and exports, and improve the state's energy security. The best minds in our state are focused on making this work, with most of the universities in New South Wales having research underway right now into one or all aspects of hydrogen production, storage, and utilisation technologies and processes. New South Wales is blessed with abundant land, wind and solar energy resources, along with pumped hydro opportunities, as well as the supply lines, expertise and infrastructure to make us a leading contender to produce the green hydrogen the world is looking for, including Korea. In addition, it is likely that with hydrogen playing a key role in the decarbonisation of our own domestic commercial heavy vehicle sector, we could become a significant market for Korean FCEV vehicles and associated hydrogen infrastructure, building on New South Wales's attributes as an attractive trade partner. We also recognise the important role a mature hydrogen industry can play in delivering deep decarbonisation in other difficult-to-abate sectors, such as steel, ammonia production, gas networks and electricity. Creating hydrogen hubs is a key focus of the National Hydrogen Strategy. New South Wales can leverage its existing infrastructure to deliver hydrogen hubs, including our large-scale export ports, co-located with heavy industry and existing hydrogen producers and users, the special activation precincts that Commissioner Roberts mentioned earlier, as well as the renewable energy zones and the Western Sydney Aerotropolis. The New South Wales Government has hit the accelerator on clean, green electricity infrastructure that's good for jobs, good for the environment, good for the economy over the short and the long term. We're investing in renewable energy zones and the transmission that will bring their electrons to market, and pumped hydro projects, including Snowy 2.0, as well as a range of other projects in New South Wales currently being supported, which will deliver clean, green hydropower for decades to come. We're using targeted, smart investment to bring technologies like hydrogen into the market to decarbonise our industries and build new ones for the future. At the heart of the government's plans and initiatives is ensuring that consumers, businesses and the economy reap the benefit of lower energy costs, better technology and more jobs. We are seizing the opportunities to modernise our grid, to deliver cheap, reliable and clean energy and establish ourselves as an energy superpower in the low-carbon economy of the future. We also want to partner with other nations, such as Korea, who are embarking on similar journeys so that we can share our learning and opportunities. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share this brief overview of New South Wales's energy ambitions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, for that wonderful presentation. Regarding your topic, I have received two questions. Hyosung Heavy Industries Corporation was wondering how the New South Wales Government will work in parallel with the energy transition put forward by the Australian Energy Market Operators 2020 integrated system, and Hyundai Heavy Industries asked at what stage the whole of government electricity retail arrangements and capacity arrangement project are in.
Thank you very much for both those questions. I might answer the second question first. The whole of government procurement process is progressing very well. It is being managed by New South Wales Procurement under New South Wales Treasury, and we are expecting to have that process finalised either late this year or early next year. So it shouldn't be too much longer until final details of that procurement approach are released. In relation to the first question, New South Wales has been working very closely with AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, not only on the most recent integrated system plan, but from its first integrated system plan back in 2018. As I mentioned, the latest 2020 ISP has reflected New South Wales's commitments around developing renewable energy zones, and we will continue to work very closely with AEMO in understanding the technical and market opportunities that our projects such as renewable energy zones, supporting enhanced transmission interconnection and developing new generation technologies such as pumped hydro and battery storage can deliver that benefit not only New South Wales consumers but the entire national energy market.
Thank you again, Mr. Lewis. We will now, for the third session, be hearing from Dr. Sung Yong Kim, a senior lecturer at Macquarie University who is currently leading a project on the sources of competitive advantage in exporting green energy systems and will be presenting on the Korean Green New Deal. Please welcome Dr. Kim.
Thank you very much, Alex. Can you hear me okay?
We certainly can.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking the co-hosts of this event, the New South Wales Government and the Consulate General of the Republic of Korea, and my special thanks to Consul General Hong Sang-woo and his team for inviting me to do this talk today. Before anything else, I'm speaking from Macquarie University, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Watamatagao clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continued to nurture this land since the dream time. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. So today I'm going to be speaking in this limited time about what I think is one of the world's most ambitious greening plans. While the rest of the world talks a lot about the possibilities of a Green New Deal, Korea, in characteristic form, has gone ahead and is currently executing one. And I'll talk very briefly also about some of the take-home points from the Korean New Deal and some of the lessons that Australia could take away from Korea's experience. Consul General Hong mentioned very briefly at the start the key features of the Korean New Deal, the K New Deal. So let me just give a little bit of background here. Let me just flesh that out a little bit. So the K New Deal is South Korea's efforts to achieve this post-COVID recovery. And it's a 5-year plan. I put a mistake. It should be 2020 to 2025, focusing on jobs creating economic growth. The total budget is $135 billion to be invested by 2025. The government is investing $96.3 billion, local government $21.2 billion, and industry $17.3 billion. And you really have to think of this more in terms of the government playing the role of seed funding for industry to play a bigger role later on. The aim is to create 1.9 million new jobs by 2025. And the key to this whole idea is to invest into 10 key projects to boost digital and green infrastructure, and also to expand the social safety net. The Green New Deal is one of these 3 core parts of the K New Deal, and there's a combined budget of US $61.9 billion. 36.6 billion of that comes from the government, the rest from local governments and industry. And the plan targets the creation of 659,000 jobs by 2025. By 2022, the aim is to invest 27.3 billion with the target of creating 319,000 new jobs. All these commitments are particularly interesting because they seek to operationalize the targets that have already been set out under the 3rd 5-year plan for green growth from 2019 to 2023. South Korea has been pursuing 5-year plans for green growth ever since 2008. And this plan has been formulated by the Committee on Green Growth, chaired by the Prime Minister and Professor Kim Jong-un. The Green New Deal has 3 core focus areas, and I'll talk about those in the next slide. The important thing is that President Moon Jae-in is taking a very direct role in the implementation of this plan by chairing a monthly strategy meeting on the K New Deal, where he monitors the performance of government ministers and the commitments by industry. So there are 3 core focus areas of the Green New Deal: green infrastructure, expansion of renewables and decentralized energy, and technological research, development, and demonstration initiatives. So under the Green Infrastructure Initiative, the government's focusing on, with a big plan here, is to digitalize and create the idea of smart cities. And that means digitalizing things like energy, water, sewage, and the idea is to apply the latest ICT innovations in artificial intelligence, big data, cloud computing, to create these new markets, to monitor energy use, and thereby optimizing the management and the automation of these city services. The second major feature of this plan is to install things like renewable energy in public buildings, and the big focus is on solar PV. the aim is to target 225,000 public buildings. So the second core feature is to expand renewables and decentralized energy. Under this initiative, the aim is to install and to rapidly scale up installed capacity for solar and wind generation. That will be increased from 12.7 gigawatts, which is the 2019 figure, to 26.3 gigawatts in 2022 and 42.7 gigawatts by 2025. And these are also important in reaching South Korea's targets under the RE 3020 roadmap, the Renewable Energy 3020 roadmap, to achieve 20% renewables by 2030 and 35% by 2040. One of the other aims is to create smart grid infrastructure and, of course, advanced metering infrastructure involving smart meters and ICT networks will be installed in 5 million more apartments. They've already been installed widely across South Korea. In terms of mobility, the aim is to target the increase in the use of electric vehicles from 91,000 in 2009 figure to 430,000 by 2022 and 1.13 million by 2025. Alongside that, the aim is to target 15,000 rapid and 30,000 standard electric vehicle recharging stations. Some of the speakers before spoke about Korea's interest in hydrogen, and that is certainly the case, as stated out in South Korea's hydrogen economy roadmap, 2040 roadmap. And in order to meet those objectives under that roadmap, the Green New Deal will deploy 200,000 hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles by 2025 and 450 hydrogen refueling units by that year as well. Under the third focus area, RD&D initiatives, the big focus is, of course, on building greener circular economy factories, because about 2/3 of South Korea's energy use comes from the manufacturing sector. So the greening of factories is of critical importance to South Korea's objectives to reach its zero emissions target by 2050, something it shares with the New South Wales government. The other big initiative is urban mining projects. The idea is to mine new materials such as copper, such as lithium, which can be recycled rather than seeking them through virgin sources. And companies like Samsung, SDI are already big investors into that field. So what are the key take-home points from the South Korean experience? The first clear thing is government leadership. South Korea's Green New Deal shows us that government can play an important role in leading post-COVID recovery efforts by providing, more than anything else, certainty for industry to invest into the economy. The second point is its focus on the creation of highly skilled jobs. The government's focus is on a massive expansion of manufacturing capabilities in cutting-edge green technologies to create these high-skilled jobs. The third is to expand opportunities for lower-skilled workers. The government's focus under the Green New Deal is expand opportunities for lower-skilled workers through the installation and the construction of renewable energy devices and infrastructure. Fourth, green growth. South Korea has been one of the world leaders in the idea of green growth, and it's continuing that under the Green New Deal. Greening for the Koreans is seen as critical to growing the economy via investing and commercializing green technologies. Lastly, manufacturing is at the heart of South Korea's Green New Deal and its post-COVID recovery. While there are urgent short-term initiatives that the government is introducing under this plan to cope with the COVID-induced recession, the Koreans are evidently focusing on the longer-term goal of establishing new green technology export industries for the future. What are some of the lessons we can take for Australia? Australia leads the world in some really cutting-edge green technologies, in developing and trialing many green fields, such as the Pilbara region, where the Australian Renewable Energy Hub has received approval, the Sun Cable project. There are many initiatives, and they're really fascinating things like energy storage, smart grids, virtual power plants. It's fascinating what's going on in this country. And There are efforts underway. The previous speaker spoke about the National Hydrogen Strategy. It's fantastic to see that Australia is focused firmly on meeting Korea's demand and other countries' demand, I might say. Germany and China have now joined the race as well. Their demand for green hydrogen to the 2019 National Hydrogen Strategy. There are also numerous things going on in New South Wales, and the thing that came to mind for me as I was writing this talk was the Western Sydney Green Gas Project. It's a fascinating project where it's a $15 million trial co-funded between Jemena, New South Wales' largest gas network owner, and ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and New South Wales government. All applaud to them has helped to fast track this project as well. The idea is to supply a certain percentage of hydrogen, green renewable produced hydrogen into the existing gas network. But Australia's current economic recovery strategy could also greatly be enhanced from a more coherent long-term vision and instilling more market certainty for industry. The federal government's gas-led recovery and the encouragement of things like fossil-fueled hydrogen jeopardizes our current global lead. And let me make it very clear, it's no exaggeration to say that many Australian companies are leading and in fact competing directly against many of South Korea's innovation champions in green technology. So we want to be able to maintain that lead and also to cooperate with Korean companies in this exciting new field. The federal government's refusal to extend the renewable energy target beyond 2020 and changes to the investment mandates of renewable energy funding agencies such as the CEFC, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, to fund gas projects, in my view, compromises domestic markets for Australia's clean tech manufacturers and the building of high-tech renewable energy markets, which is precisely what I was hearing that's planned under the New South Wales government's electricity strategy. So the key lesson from South Korea, if I may finish on this final point, is that to never waste a crisis. As you know, this COVID crisis has inflicted terrible harm, but it also presents us with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Australia, as the Koreans have been doing, to dominate world markets for the export of green energy. And that's precisely what we should be doing, focusing in a coherent and organised and coordinated manner between the federal and New South Wales governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim, for that look at the very important Green New Deal. Our last presenter is the head of the Healthcare Centre of Excellence and Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner Designate for Korea at Austrade, Ms. Julie Quinn, who will be discussing the investment opportunities available in the biotechnology sector in Australia. Please welcome Ms. Quinn.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, Consul General, Commissioner, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As Australia's next Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner to South Korea, it is my great honour to speak to you today on behalf of the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, otherwise known as Austrade. Next slide, thank you. With over 80 offices around the world, we have experts in Australia and abroad to collaborate to provide advice for both our Australian exporters and also for international businesses seeking investment opportunities in Australia. And many of you will be aware that our Seoul office is co-located with the Australian Embassy in the Kyobo building in Seoul. We have about 18 people in the office, and I am very much looking forward to commencing there, hopefully early in 2021. Next slide, thank you. So I know many of you on the call today are not in the biotechnology industry, but I really would like to explain to you why Australia is a thriving biotechnology hub and to present some opportunities for investment in biotechnology here. And it is true that with the COVID-19 pandemic, there has never been a greater focus on biotechnology, with health and biotech on the front of our newspapers every day, and the pressures on all nations to protect their citizens through the development of a vaccine. So in Australia, we are ranked in the top 5 for biotech innovation globally. We have our oldest biotech company is actually more than 100 years old, and that is CSL. It started its life as a vaccine producer, developing vaccines against influenza and polio, and is now one of the major players globally in vaccines and also in blood products. So we have a long history in biotech. Our federal and state governments fund heavily medical and biotech research, and we really do excel per capita in the number of research publications and patent lodgements in Australia. We are internationally regarded in medical research in areas particularly including regenerative medicine, oncology, immunology, neuroscience, and genomics. We have a very high standard of healthcare, and we're a very much sought after partner for clinical trials and commercialising research. But looking at COVID-19, we've done extremely well, like Korea, in managing the response, but in a biotech sense, we have a number of vaccine candidates already in development, and we have, as well as those in clinical trials in Australia, we are conducting at least 8 clinical trials, including some from international companies who see Australia as a great destination to conduct their phase 1 trials in Australia. Australians were the first to grow and characterise the COVID virus outside of China, and like Korea, we also have rapid diagnostic tests in development, as well as, of course, we've responded with regards to PPE and care of patients and other areas. Next slide, thank you. The Korean and Australian biotech industries have recognised our strengths, particular of medicine, and over the last 6 or 7 years, Austrade has facilitated the connections between the industry bodies in Korea and in Australia. In particular, we have supported agreements between our industry body Biotech and the Council for Advanced Regenerative Medicine in Korea, also the Korea Health Industry Development Institute, which is the organiser of Asia's biggest biotech conference, BioKorea. We also have agreements in place between Biotech and the Strategic Centre for Regenerative Medicine. And it's true to say that there is great sense of collaboration between each country, big delegations to each other's trade events. In fact, Biotech meeting was just held last week, and we had a special Korea Biotech showcase, albeit virtually. But just a year ago, there was a physical delegation of Korean investors and biotech companies to Australia, and they had the pleasure of visiting Sydney during their visit to Australia. So these collaborations, next slide, thank you, along with strong complementary domestic foundations, have really seen increased activity in biotech between Korea and Australia. Next slide, thanks. So thank you, and I think we'll move to the next slide, conscious of time. So some of the companies that have already established in Australia are listed on the next slide, including Yuhan Corporation, one of Korea's biggest pharma companies. I'd like to highlight a couple of others, though. So Celltrion and CKD Bio have established in Australia and their Australian headquarters in Sydney. And another Sydney company, Elastogen, which was a spin-out from the University of Sydney, a premier Australian university, was invested in by Korean investment partners. They co-invested with Australia's largest biotech VC, Brandon Capital, and there was a successful exit from that at the end of 2018 when it was acquired by the global pharma Allergan for about $100 million US, plus milestone payments to follow. Next slide, thank you. So on to New South Wales, thank you specifically. Next slide, thank you. I think you're all aware New South Wales is Australia's most populous state, and therefore has a number of our top universities, medical institutions and hospitals. We have a comprehensive health ecosystem in Australia and in Sydney, focused around those major centres. I think you've already heard of the great investment going on by Commissioner Roberts, but $10.1 billion over 4 years is a capital investment in healthcare in New South Wales. is well regarded for its clinical trials internationally, and 30% of all of those trials are conducted in New South Wales. Asia's biggest contract research organisation for clinical trials, Biotech, is headquartered in New South Wales, and there are some other fantastic CROs also there. There is a rapid turnaround process for applications, and that combined with our attractive R&D tax incentives makes New South Wales a very attractive place to consider trials. Next slide, please. I've listed here a number of the organisations involved in biotech in New South Wales, and that includes institutes, universities, and some companies. You'll see that I've grouped the companies and organisations by their area of biotech, and Sydney and New South Wales in particular are very strong in cell and gene therapies and genomics and personalised medicine. Next slide, thank you. And that leads me on to what I think is probably the most significant and important biotech investment opportunity in Australia at that moment, and that is a potential investment into the Westmead Precinct, already mentioned by Commissioner Roberts. This is already a significant health and medtech precinct in Australia, but with a further investment of $3 billion, this precinct is only going to grow even larger, and the goal is to have 50,000 staff working there by 2036, 40,000 students, several university campuses, 4 hospitals and 4 institutes, as well as, I think, New South Wales' largest pathology facility there. Add to this a very large patient base, and this is going to be an ideal facility for Korean companies interested in entering the Australian market to establish a footprint. There is one specific investment opportunity at the moment, and that is into a viral vector manufacturing facility. Viral vectors are produced for cell and gene therapies, and there is currently a global shortage in production of these vectors. New South Wales has recognised that and wishes to establish the Australian facility there at the Westmead Precinct, and so is looking for partners there. But it's not only the viral vector facility. This is really a great opportunity for business to set up perhaps their Australian headquarters, perhaps a VC operation there, to be the first to look at the outputs that are going to come out of this concentrated effort of talent, infrastructure and resources and patients as well. Next slide, thank you. So the key investment opportunities in New South Wales, I think, can be grouped into 3 broad areas. One is to either co-invest with Australian VCs, fund managers for technology investment, or perhaps to set up an Australian subsidiary to do so, as one of the other Korean companies previously on a previous slide has already done. Australia really is underserved in capital to fund new technologies, and there is ample opportunity for investment, and our great biotech and med environment in Australia is really keen to attract new investment opportunities. The Westmead site is covering 75,000 hectares, and there will be 400,000 square metres of high-end development there. So there really are both greenfield and brownfield investment opportunities at Westmead, but also elsewhere in New South Wales to establish a subsidiary, perhaps an innovation and research hub in collaboration with others. We know Koreans are very keen on open innovation, hence their interest in Australia through the delegations to Australia, and as mentioned, clinical trials is also very strong. We know how strong Korea is in biologics manufacturing, and there is a real opportunity for them to bring their know-how to establish biologics manufacturing here in Australia. Biologics is a really fast-growing area of biotech. In fact, the top-selling drug in the world at the moment is a biological substance, that is Humira, and its revenues last year were $10 million on its own, just one drug. Lots of development in biologics, lots of expertise and know-how in Australia, great opportunity to establish manufacturing facilities here, of which we are currently quite short of. I mentioned the Westmead opportunity, and Australia is also very well regarded as a testbed market in biotech. One of the advantages of our geography and our population is we have a very diverse population base. Companies can test their products in Australia before they launch to North America and Europe. Great opportunity there. I think next, jump 2 slides, I think. Just in summary, just to conclude, why Australia for biotech? We have a great biotechnology ecosystem. I mentioned R&D tax incentives. These are very generous, and companies that come to Australia and set up an Australian subsidiary here or a new company can really capitalise on about 45% tax incentive, which is returned in cash to develop and continue their research and development in Australia. Of course, we have a great free trade agreement and terrific clinical trials capabilities with data that is recognised by the major world regulatory bodies and a very good CRO base. Next slide, thank you. So just in conclusion, I would be very happy to receive emails from any of you. Of course, the New South Wales Government, I'm sure, would be very willing to take your questions as well, but happy to assist wherever we can. And I look forward to meeting some of you perhaps once I get to Seoul next year. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Ms. Quinn. I just have a question that has been submitted from one of the participating companies. Altera Incorporated would like to know if there is any increasing demand within the Australian biometric market for facial recognition on fire and smoke detection using visual anomaly detection technology.
Well, thank you for the question, Alex, and the company. I must confess that's a little outside my biotech expertise, but I do know that in Australia we have some great computer vision experts, particularly in Data 61 and CSIRO, and I know there is a lot of work going on in biometrics, but I will have to take that question on notice. And Alex, if you're able to share that with me later, I would be happy to respond by email.
No, of course. Thank you so much for that, Ms. Quinn. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you also to all of our speakers today. All of you are invaluable sources of knowledge, particularly for the Korea-New South Wales trade relationship. That concludes the Korea-New South Wales Business Forum for 2020. On behalf of the Consulate General of the Republic of Korea in Sydney, we thank you all again for attending today's forum event. We hope to see you all in person in the near future. 감사합니다. Thank you very much.